And now, in studio, bringing his Midwest values from the Show Me State to the land of San Diego. He's a triple threat, licensed as an attorney, mortgage broker, and a top producing realtor who's crushing the competition. Here to deliver you what's happening in the trenches of the market. Your host, Michael Gaddis.
Welcome back to the Michael Gaddis Show on AM 1170 The Answer. I am your host, Michael Gaddis of michaelgaddis.com and frontierloangroup.com. I have my special guest today, Ashley Cairns of Sullivan Hill and Allison Soares of RJS Law. And we're going to continue our discussion of tax implications and divorces and all kinds of fun stuff like that. Taxes and divorces and audits and all the stuff that you want to listen to. So, but during the break, we were talking a little bit about some, that there's foreign aspects to this. And can you tell us a little bit about what you were talking about during the break?
Yeah, so what we were talking about is that during a divorce, the spouse must go back and disclose all of the marital assets. And the spouse may go back and disclose a foreign bank account. Sometimes there's a foreign bank account, they've established it because they're working overseas, or they sold a property overseas, and they come back and it's now listed in the family law court, and we now know there's a foreign bank account out there. So what we need to do is we need to determine, first of all, was there any income on that foreign bank account? We need to go back and see whether or not the person had any obligation to disclose that bank account and what type of disclosure that they have. So this happens quite often, you'd be surprised. Somebody goes back and they were born in another country, their family member passes away, and they are a signer on a foreign bank account. I had a woman her father was French, she was born in France, she didn't have any money, she was a school teacher here, and she was relying on the father's assets to go back after he passed away for her retirement. She had gone through a divorce and she had disclosed it to the husband. And the husband came in to see me and wanted to know what he needed to do. And so we went through these steps with him. And the first question is, was there any income generated in that foreign bank account? Sometimes it's a savings account and it's a small interest that's on it. Other times it's an active account, and we need to determine whether or not there's actually a disclosure requirement. So if there is a disclosure requirement, there are two different programs that the IRS offers. One of them is relatively new, and the other one's a little bit long-standing. It's been around since about 2011. It's called an offshore voluntary disclosure. What this does is it allows a person to come back and to disclose this foreign bank account over the period of time. You have a duty to disclose this to the IRS. You don't necessarily have to pay any additional tax on it, but you do have to go back and disclose it. So people have these foreign bank accounts. They must file amended returns for 8 years. They must file FBARs, which are these disclosure returns that are reporting the asset for 8 years. They must pay penalties and interest on any of the tax that was unreported, and they must go back and pay what's a 27.5% penalty.
Wow. I mean, when I'm sitting here listening to you, and I'm probably in the same position as everybody who's listening out there, my eyes are getting bigger, and I'm like, I remember, I'm back in tax law again right now, and I'm like just getting scared and frightened, and it's intimidating. These tax laws there's so many of them, there's so many implications on so many different levels that you wouldn't even think about. I wouldn't have even thought about, foreign accounts.
And you have to think about these accounts, sometimes the highest value over these periods. The assessment, the penalty in the 27.5% is the highest aggregate value over the past 8 years. So what can happen is there may not be that much money in the account now. It's at the highest point over those past 8 years. So whether it's a mutual fund, whether it was a stock account, whatever the funds that were in the account at the time. So sometimes people are stuck with a tax bill. They don't even have the funds to pay.
So what recommendations do you make to people? I mean, what do you let's say I'm a guy, I'm coming in, I'm proactive, right? I'm not waiting for the train to hit me on the tracks, right?
Yeah.
I may hear a faint whistle in the distance, and I say, you know what? I better get some professional advice, which is what you should all do, by the way. All of you should not wait until the train's about to hit you before you contact professionals. But tell me, what advice would you give me? How would you help me out?
So the second option then is this offshore voluntary disclosure is a streamlined program. And this is probably what I would recommend to you. If you weren't willful and you didn't know what was going on, you didn't know about the bank account in the divorce, all of a sudden you're going through the divorce and your wife reports it to the family law court, what we would do is we would go back through the streamlined program. What's nice about the streamlined program is it's only a 5% penalty. And the 5% penalty is 3 years. You have to file your amended tax returns for 3 years. You do have to file the FBARs, which is disclosing the foreign account, for 6 years. But that penalty from 27.5% to 5% is a huge decrease. And if you were not willful and you attest to that and sign the document stating you were not willful, you did not know of it, as soon as you found out about it, we disclosed it.
Well, let's talk about something else, because you gave me a list of talking points here today, and there's a couple of them that are kind of sticking out, and you have alimony and child support. How does alimony and child support play into all of this?
Well, alimony payments as a general rule are deductible to the payor and are reportable as income to the recipient. Now, just kind of talking about the foreign aspects that arise for alimony payments, one thing that you need to be aware of is if you are making alimony payments to a non-resident spouse, in order for those alimony payments to be deductible, there needs to actually be withholding. So the question becomes, well, how much do I withhold? And if there's a treaty in place between the U.S. and the country where that spouse is a citizen of, you need to look at that treaty first and figure out what the withholding rate is. Well, sometimes there are no treaties with the foreign spouse's country. In that situation, the withholding rate is going to be 30%. So that's going to be very important for the payor spouse. And it's important to recognize that the withholding obligation applies even if that non-resident spouse lives in the U.S., if the non-resident spouse is living abroad, if they are being paid with funds already held in the country. It doesn't matter that you are not sending the funds over to that foreign country. And if you're divorced in the other country and the support order is from the other country, none of that matters. You still have to withhold in order for that amount to be deductible. And what happens if you don't withhold? What are the consequences? If you don't withhold, both the recipient and the payor spouse can be liable for the taxes, penalties, and interest. So it's very important for the family law attorney to advise their clients who have a non-resident spouse of this withholding requirement. Now on the flip side of that, it's a little bit easier on the child support side. The child support side, it's not deductible and there's no reporting requirements there.
One interesting thing about the alimony, though, is similar to what you mentioned before. You go through court, you have an MSA, and you expect the IRS to follow it. What happens with that when you have alimony payments? If you and your wife say, listen, we don't want to get attorneys involved, we just want to do this amicably, I promise to pay you $1,000 a month. We're going to deduct it, I'm going to pay you, I'm going to deduct it, you have to include it in income. It's not allowable by the IRS.
Yeah, it's not?
It's not. You actually, voluntary payments and verbal agreements do not count.
So what happens in that scenario? Because I have heard a lot of people do that. They don't want to get attorneys involved. Maybe there's not a lot of assets or something like, but they make arrangements outside of that, and let's say he is making voluntary payments.
It's got to be a written agreement.
I see.
There has to be some type of document in place.
It can't just be verbal. It can't be verbal. So what happens in that case? Then it's what's it considered?
It's not deductible. It's
Oh,
not
I
deductible on
see.
your tax return.
I
so
see.
The person's being audited.
So the lesson here is if you are going to have that scenario, everything has to be in writing in some form. No matter how informal you might want to try to keep it, it's in your best interest from not just the basic family law principle standpoint, but from the legal standpoint, it could come back and bite you.
Exactly.
Because it's interesting we're talking about divorce, because when I had the divorce attorneys on, we were talking about statistics, on divorce rates and it being so high, and when I broke down a ton of statistics when I analyzed it, and there was different age brackets of when the divorce rate based upon how old you were when you got married. That's kind of inflating some of it, But at the same time, nobody goes into a marriage thinking, I'm going to get a divorce, and I better plan for a divorce. I mean, I was watching a movie with George Clooney last night. He was a divorce attorney in there, and it was just, of course, the legalities of it were just nonsense, but the concept was there. It's that, they just, whenever these kind of people see, weddings, it's almost there's a 50% or greater chance that it's going to end up in a divorce. And, as you're sitting here telling me about the tax implications of it, I mean, it's bad enough to have to figure out when your children are going to be visiting, and how you're going to split the time up, how you're going to split the house up and the property. Now you've got these tax implications, which could, like something like that, could cause friction between somebody later on, because even if it started off amicably and you're saying, hey, look, I'll give you $1,000 a month and we'll do this, and he does it, but then all of a sudden he realizes he can't deduct it and he's got to pay tax. It's like, it can cause friction between you guys.
Exactly. That's why it's really important to document everything when you are going through the divorce and really understand the tax implications, because there are different requirements as well. You also have to make sure that you write in there when it's going to terminate. If you're going to pay alimony, you need to say the termination date of the alimony payment. You need to make sure that you go back and that you're not transferring assets or real estate to the person, that you're actually making payments to the person.
Well, you're listening to the Michael Gaddis Show on AM 1170 The Answer. I'm your host, Michael Gaddis of michaelgaddis.com and frontierloangroup.com. And my special guests today are Ashley Cairns of Sullivan Hill and Allison Soares of RJS Law. And I think basically what you're saying to me from your last statement is you need to be prudent, okay? I know that there's a lot of emotions that are wrapped up in this type of thing, but if you are in a divorce and you're trying to amicably resolve it, and let's say it's a mutual decision and everybody's on good terms, you need to spend, even if you spend a little bit, here's what I'm going to say, spend a little bit of money to get some professional advice. I know you want to keep lawyers out of it, and lawyers have this connotation of us being some sort of monsters, and people don't literally they don't want to talk to us at all. But I think the point is that, just by spending a little bit of money, you can get some solid advice, which is not only going to help you from a financial perspective in the future, but it's going to preserve your relationships. Because I'm telling you, it's going to cause friction between you if all of a sudden the guy's like, wait a minute, I can't deduct this? And all of a sudden it's going to cause a lot of friction that shouldn't have been there. So just being a little bit, again, proactive versus reactive and covering all your bases is really important.
Exactly.
Well, you're listening to the Michael Gaddis Show, and after the break, we'll continue our conversation with Allison Soares and Ashley Cairns about tax. And we're going to talk a little bit about tax implications in real estate transactions. You're listening to the Michael Gaddis Show on AM 1170, The Answer.